Hello, RDs and RDs to be. Welcome to the RD Exam Ready podcast. I'm Zak Kaesberg, your tutor, your coach, your guide along the path to passing the CDR exam. And my biggest passion is to help RDs and RDs to be just like you, to know how to effectively pass the CDR exam. And if that sounds like you, then you're in the right place. Join me this upcoming Wednesday for another RD Exam Ready Live, hosted on YouTube at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Time. That'll be 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain Time, 5 o'clock Pacific Time. So wherever you're located, that'll be the time you show up for this session. If you can't show up for these sessions or have something better to do that night, just watch back the recording on the RD Exam Ready YouTube channel and just make sure you're subbed. While making up one of the three macronutrients, fats and oils truly are a topic that many of us have very limited knowledge on. A lot of us really know the basics quite well. When it comes to fats, that there's good ones, there's bad ones, there's types of diseases, comorbidities, that excessive fats or bad fats in the diet can have that effect on the body. This is all stuff we know really well. We've all reviewed it together, we've learned it in many, many classes. However, something that that we use every single day is fats in cooking, but we don't know much about the food science behind those fats. This really helps to give us a lot of strong qualities in our cooking process with use of fats. And so it's really important that we understand the science behind those fats that we use in the cooking process. Honestly speaking, if our food did not contain fat, it just would not be so appealing. Fat serves so many functions in the body. Firstly, it's going to give heat transfer. Heat transfer is the ability to have a medium for heat transfer. So when you're sauteing foods in a pan, this is transferring heat from the pan to the oil that you're cooking it in and into the food that you're cooking. That gives us the ability also that fats have is shortening power. Shortening power is when they're being added to foods, they tend to tenderize, soften things like baked goods, and even help to control gluten development, which helps your baked products remain soft and easy to chew. Fat also acts as an emulsifier, helping to mix things that are water-based and fat-based. Things like mayonnaise, salad dressings, gravies, puddings, and cream soup are all emulsified much better with the use of fats. Fats have different melting points as well, depending on several factors. We're going to discuss more of those factors later today. Those different levels of saturation, when I've talked about in the podcast before, early on I did an episode called Biochemistry of Fats, really early on, and that's when I talked about different things of levels of saturation, saturated fats, unsaturated fats, use of the health. So go back to that episode if you want to learn more about different saturated and unsaturated fats in this case. In the food science setting, use of melting points with fats really shows us that different fats can have different melting points, and food scientists can use those to make foods taste better. For instance, with use of certain fats to add to chocolate, we can make it so it doesn't melt in our hand every time that we try to eat it. Great things, right? Fats also have the ability for plasticity. And when you think of plasticity, think about how well something holds a structure or shape when they're molded. If you've ever seen kind of those first prize winners that are at like these county fairs where you do a butter sculpture, well, how do you think they got that sculpture formed out of butter? It's because butter and fats have a great amount of plasticity. You can really pack them in very, very well, really get them to pack in and hold their shape very well. We also see this in baked goods, things like icings or pastries, because you can create icings to hold their shape on a cake and have a bride and groom up there if you want to, and it'll hold that full structure just based on that fat content. Now, in terms of solubility, you should know that fats are insoluble in water. They do not dissolve in water. This contributes to many unique flavors and textures in different foods and dressings that fats are used in. Fat serves an excellent purpose in terms of mouthfeel and flavor. That's why we eat them. They give us this very rich mouthfeel. And you can also use it to modify foods that are generally pretty bland and dry and make them easier to chew and eat. Another example of this is when you deep fry chicken. Deep fried chicken has a crazy different texture and mouthfeel compared to that of like baked and roasted chicken, and fat helps that. Fat also contributes to the texture of foods, helping to keep your pastries nice and flaky, give you smooth ganaches, dips, and spreads that you like to use, and even keeping your crispy foods nice and crispy like that of fried chicken. You can really tenderize and alter the texture of foods very easily with use of fats. On appearance, fats have the ability to provide a nice sheen, oily type of plain color. This is good for things like icings if you want them to appear nice and shiny, if you want your food to appear nice and moist. It really helps to provide that to foods. On the appearance, as we talked about, we can also talk about the satiety of how fats help us. Fats help with satiety because they make us feel very full. So they have a nice, full, filling effect on the body, which is great to be eating fats with food so that you feel full after your meals. And lastly, fats, of course, contribute nutrients, don't they? How many kilocalories per gram is that going to be? That'll be 9 kcals per gram from fats. And also, fats contribute to fat soluble vitamins and even essential fatty acids that are being used in the body for different functional foods. Now, we're going to shift gears and talk about properties of fats, getting into more of this science based stuff a little bit here. A couple reminders. Plant oils and plants fat typically are going to be, well, I'll ask you, are they going to be saturated or unsaturated, those plants? Plant oils will be unsaturated mostly, and they are generally liquid at room temperature. Animal fats are the opposite. We know they generally contain more saturated fats or bad fats and tend to be more solid at room temperature. Now, the length of a fatty acid can also determine its melting point. The longer the length of the fatty acid, the higher its melting point tends to be, right? Now, some things that we kind of think of a little bit when it comes to melting point is the different types of fats, levels of saturation, and how that kind of influences it too. So, like those saturated fats, we know they're going to tend to have a higher melting point, for instance, like that of butter. Butter I put on my counter and it'll stay solid at room temperature, right? Whereas my plant oils, which have a lot more of unsaturated, they tend to have lower melting points. They tend to be liquid at room temperature as well. So these are all ways that can influence the melting point of some of those fats to the point at which they become liquid. Remember, don't mix up your melting point with your smoke point because they are different. Now, we're going to talk about different types of fats in food and just different forms of it. Butter is the main one we're going to start with. Butter's the big guy, right? Butter is literally churned cream in milk. So the cream always rises to the top. You may have heard that before. And that cream of milk is being skimmed off of the top. What we do is we then churn that cream to make butter. We also will add things in there with that butter. We may add things like annatto seed or beta carotene that can help to change the color to make butter more attractive, as well as act as an antioxidant. We also know butter is readily used in tons of baked goods, right? Because it provides a great amount of flakiness, tenderness to pastries, and it helps to increase the shelf life because butter, since it has such a low melting point, a high melting point, pardon me, it tends to keep things moist for a very long time, okay? So it decreases the loss of moisture. It helps prevent those things from becoming stale. Margarine is kind of like the dirty cousin of butter a little bit here. Margarine is a different type of fat, as you know. What's the deal with it, though? Well, margarine, at least this is what my grandma told me, it became popular because many people learned that saturated fats were bad. Okay, they heard butter is a negative thing on their health. Hence, we started using margarine for a few different reasons. Margarine is made up of soybean, corn, safflower, canola, or some type of other hydrogenated vegetable oil. We're adding this oil with some milk fats, just a little bit, not as much of that as butter. And what happens is by using those different hydrogenated vegetable oils and stuff, that melting point may come down on that butter just a little bit, or it may go up, possibly. So margarine, what's really nice about it and how this factors into melting point is the fact that margarine tends to be a lot easier to spread on stuff. And that's because you're using those oils. Those oils tend to have a little bit of a lower melting point, tend to be liquid at room temperature. and thus it's much easier to spread margarine on bread as compared to that of butter. Wanted to tie that up really quick there. And also add in that there is going to be a few different things that are added to margarine: cultured milk, emulsifiers, mono and diglycerides, several preservatives like that of EDTA or sodium benzoate will help to keep that margarine fresh for a longer period. Also, we're probably going to add some vitamin A, some vitamin D, some food colorings to give it that orange and yellow hue. But as I said, the big appeal for margarine is that it may have a little bit less calories in it, may be able to spread it more on foods a little bit, and it's going to have a little bit less of those saturated fats and more of those unsaturated fats inside of them. What is shortening? Shortening, not just becoming shorter, but shortening in food science is coming from plant oils. So, what shortening is, if you've ever seen a can of Crisco around, shortening is going to be plant oils that have been hydrogenated, okay? Meaning that they've been made to be more solid. Remember, hydrogenation means we're modifying a plant oil and we're going to saturate it with hydrogens to make it more solid. Commonly, we're going to make shortening out of soybean oil. Soybean oil is commonly going to be hydrogenated with hydrogens until it reaches a solid consistency. Then we whip it or pump it with air to give it some volume, some structure, and kind of a nice white color, opaque color that you see. Shortening is ideal for things that need solid fat, like flaky pastries and cakes, and it's probably going to be a little bit cheaper to use shortening instead of just straight butter because butter actually has to come from cows, whereas shortening is just being made from that of your different soybean and plant oils. Now, on the topic of oils, oils can be derived from different fruits and nuts and seeds, okay? So we're going to talk about vegetable oils now. From seeds, you can get soybean oil, safflower oil, corn oil. From fruits, we can get coconut oil and avocado and palm kernel oils. And from nuts, you can get yummy things like walnut oils, almond oils, peanut oils. Depending on their source and use, it's really going to change the flavor of the oil. For instance, if we use walnut oil on a salad, walnut oil has a pretty dark color, kind of has a strong nutty aroma and flavor. So this might be appealing for some dishes, but maybe not for others. Many of these oils tend to be quite refined, so they don't have lots of byproducts in them, right? And many of these oils serve a really great purpose for frying, and that's because these vegetable oils tend to have a higher smoke point compared to other oils. Now we're going to talk a bit about this smoke point. Make sure you understand it quite well. In a minute, I'll hold off on the smoke point once we get through a few other of these products here. Lard and tallow are becoming much more popular forms of fat that people are buying and using now. Lard and tallow are derived from pork and beef, respectively. If I were going to be using lard and tallow for cooking, I have to make sure that it's been rendered. Rendering is a process that is done in a manufacturing plant usually, and it's done on these fats. If I just take the straight fat from the animal, it's going to have a very strong aroma and taste. Let's use bacon as an example. If I use bacon grease and then I cook something with that bacon grease, well, then everything tastes like bacon. It smells like bacon, right? Sometimes this is desirable, right? Sometimes if I want to make hash browns with bacon grease, perfect. That's very desirable. But if I'm trying to bake croissants, it's probably not going to be so desirable to use bacon grease because everything will taste like bacon. So by rendering these fats, they actually melt these fats down. They remove some of the impurities. They deodorize them so they don't have that off flavor and smell that animal fat tends to have. They'll also add some antioxidants to them to help increase their shelf life and make them a little easier to use. These types of fats from lard and tallow can be used for commercial frying, roasting, cooking, all different types of applications they can be used. Another fat to touch on here is going to be cocoa butter, which is being derived from the cacao tree. Cocoa butter is used for different products like soaps, cosmetics, different lotions we know, but it's also used in types of chocolates and candies. Because it provides a very melt in your mouth type of sensation, because it has a melting point that's just below normal body temperature. So if you put it in your mouth, it starts to melt, but before then, it didn't start melting. So that's one of the big benefits of that, of using that kind of cacao tree or that cocoa butter in that case. Now, let's talk about more cooking applications here. We're going to talk about smoke point here soon about high temperatures. Let's really talk about what fats are commonly used for and what we like to use them for. Really, I love fats because it helps to fry stuff up. However, not every fat is going to be suitable for deep frying. When you deep fry foods, you're deep frying them at very high temperatures, right around 350 to 450 degrees. If you don't choose a proper type of fat and oil, smoke will develop and there will be rancid flavors that end up happening when you cook with them. This is no good. When you're cooking with fats, you want to make sure you're paying attention to the smoke point of those oils. Generally, you want to fry fats in oils that have a high smoke point above 420 degrees. This is usually ideal. Fat boils at a much higher temperature compared to that of water. Water boils at 212 degrees, which is pretty low compared to fats, which boil anywhere from 350 to 450 degrees. You have to make sure you choose fats with high smoke points because if you don't, those oils are going to overheat and they're going to break down. The fatty acids, the triglycerides that are within that oil will decompose. So they'll decompose into glycerol and individually fatty acids. And that glycerol molecule can actually be hydrolyzed to this steel blue smoke that's called acrylamide, which is a really bad odor, very bad taste, very irritating to breathe in. So it can actually be toxic. So as I said, let's choose fats that have a high smoke point above 420 degrees. That's how I would choose them. This would include fats like vegetable oils, corn oil, sesame oil, ghee, soybean, and avocado oils. But let's go through each of these on the list from lowest to highest for smoke points. Your lowest of the lowest, 250 to 300 degrees, will be your butter. Butter is a very low smoke point and is terrible for frying. Right above that would be your vegetable shortening, your Crisco, that soybean oil Crisco, because we hydrogenate it. We hydrogenate. We added lots of hydrogens to it to make it a hydrogenated oil. We'll call it that. That smoke point is going to be 350 to 370 degrees for that Crisco there. Okay, so still pretty low. After that is lard. Lard is going to have a smoke point from 360 to about 400 degrees, not proper for frying items. Most olive oils will have a smoke point from 390 to 400 degrees. That makes them great for sauteing vegetables, but for deep frying things, it's not going to be appropriate. Now we're getting into the fats that we can use for frying. This would be our vegetable oils like cottonseed, corn, canola, peanuts, safflower. Those would all be great ones that can be used for frying, and they'll have a smoke point up to 450 depending on the oil. Sesame oil is right there next to it. It has a smoke point right around 440. That's why it's great for Asian-based stir-fry dishes. Ghee or clarified butter has a smoke point of 485 degrees, way higher than regular butter. Why is that though? Do we know why? Well, let's talk about it. Once those milk solids, what kind of happens with butter is butter has lots of milk solids in them, okay? So that's the reason why butter smokes so easily is because it has those milk solids in them, and those are what are smoking super easy. Ghee does not have those milk solids. So it still has milk, but it doesn't have as much of the solids. To make ghee, you clarify it, you melt it, and then you remove those milk solids out of there and then let it solidify. So once you've removed those milk solids, now you have a fat product that contains less of those milk solids, less of those byproducts, and now the oil is pretty much 100% fat, and it has the ability to reach a higher smoke point of 485 with use of ghee. Above that is going to be our soybean oil with a smoke point of 492 degrees, and the highest of the high would be your avocado oil, which has a smoke point up to 520 degrees, which is hot, hot, right? Now, to talk about the cold a little bit, I want to touch on what a winterized oil is. You may have heard this term before and you may not have understood it too well, so let's talk about it. When you take a vegetable oil, when it's liquid at room temperature, you may have put it in the fridge before by accident. Maybe you're putting away groceries and someone put it in there. If you put vegetable oils in the fridge at 41 degrees or below, some of them actually won't stay liquid anymore. They may turn solid at that point, right? So you may have seen this like in olive oil. I've seen that before. Um, so as you're kind of thinking of those there, those ones with those lower smoke, oh my gosh, those lower melting points like that of olive oil, we see this cloudiness develop when you place it in there. You don't really want your salad dressings and things made up of oil to have this cloudy, weird texture. You'd prefer them to be nice and smooth, right? So, what you can do is you can take that oil and winterize it. Winterizing an oil will eliminate this cloudiness by removing some of those cloudy oil compounds in solids, filtering them out. So then what's nice is those oils that you've winterized, like that you would use in salad dressings, are going to stay nice and smooth, not cloudy, nice and clear when you put them in the refrigerator. Versus if it was a unwinterized oil, it would turn cloudy, chunky, and a little bit weird in the fridge. But winterized oils are going to help keep them smooth and clear. Nice, right? Storage of fats. Fats are best stored in the refrigerator to prevent oxidation. I know that sounds confusing based on what we just said, but if I take olive oil and I put it in the fridge and it turns a bit solid, if I remove it from the fridge, it's just going to turn back to a liquid, okay? Butter, you want to keep in the fridge, but you can also freeze butter as well, and it'll stay fresh for much longer, okay? Now we need to talk about rancidity, okay? About when your fats become rancid. Rancidity is literally it's the chemical deterioration of fats, and it occurs when triglyceride molecules are broken down into smaller units that create a bad flavor and odor. What this is caused by is two different types of rancidity that you need to know for exam day. You have hydrolytic rancidity and oxidative rancidity. Hydrolytic rancidity is when fats become rancid because they've been exposed to water, which can affect the stability of those triglycerides. Oxidative rancidity is when that fat has been exposed to oxygen, salt, food particles, and certain metals. So mostly it's due to oxidation of them. To prevent rancidity, you want to avoid excessive amounts of oxygen or keeping your fats exposed. And you also want to avoid excessive amounts of heat, right, to help prevent that rancidity. Another thing people will do with their frying oils specifically is they'll add antioxidants to help prevent rancidity because it'll prevent that oxidation, right? We would add these two triglycerides to help prevent them from breaking down and prevent rancidity. This would be things like vitamin E, which is an antioxidant, vitamin C is an antioxidant, lecithin, flavonoids, BHA, BHT, TBHQ. These are all things that are effectively used to preserve your frying oils. Now, to wrap up this part here, we're going to talk about grades of fats. But luckily, there's only one product to know the grades of. You'll need to know the grades of butter. In order to call it butter, it must meet a threshold for a specific amount of milk fat that it contains. Butter is graded based on its flavor, body texture, salts, and color content. Butter is going to be laid grade AA if it is superior quality. So AA is the highest quality. Right below that would be grade A, indicating it's very good quality. The most common grade that you and I see inside the grocery stores is going to be our grade AA. Now that you've gotten the big lesson on your food science of fats and oils, let's see you apply it to a few practice questions here, RD to be. Number 1, an increase in the length of a saturated fatty acid will blank its melting point. A, unchange, B, increase, C, decrease, or D, double. Number 1, an increase in the length of a saturated fatty acid will blank its melting point. Okay, Let's take a look at this here. For A, unchange. Well, I don't think that an increase in length will unchange it. I feel like it would do something with it. I'm going to rule out answer A. B, an increase in the length of a saturated fatty acid will increase its melting point. I do feel that this would be a good answer. The longer that saturated fatty acid ends up getting, I would think the higher its melting point is going to be. I'm going to hold on to answer B here. C, decrease. Will it decrease its melting point if it's a longer chain? No, I don't believe that'll be the case. I actually think it's going to increase it based on what we've talked today. Or D, double. So an increase in length of saturated fatty acid will double its melting point. No, that doesn't seem to fit too well. For number one, I would say our best answer in this case would be to B, increase. So an increase in length of saturated fatty acid will increase its melting point. Positive correlation there. Number two, a food service manager hears reports of the oil being used for cooking tasting rancid and off. The food service manager looks at the cooking area and notices that the oil is in an open container without a lid. This would lead to A, hydrolytic rancidity, B, standard rancidity, C, oxidative rancidity, or D, hydrophobic rancidity. A food service manager hears reports of the oil being used for cooking tasting rancid. They observe the cooking area and notice that the oil is in an open container without a lid. This would lead to, okay, let's start with A, hydrolytic rancidity. This is when things become rancid due to exposure of water. Although this is a true thing that can lead to rancidity, I don't feel like it's a good answer here because there was no reports of water coming in contact with our oil to lead to that rancidity. I might put a question mark by it, but for now I'm just going to rule it out completely. B, standard rancidity. I'm not familiar with what standard rancidity is. Maybe that's just when our oils get old over some time, but it doesn't seem like one that would be a good fit for this based on what I've learned, so I'm going to rule that one out. C, oxidative rancidity. This feels like a great answer because oxygen is oxidative, and oxidative rancidity occurs when your fats are left exposed to oxygen. That's what the food service manager noticed on the line here. C seems like a good answer, and I'm going to put a check mark by it. Or D, hydrophobic rancidity. I haven't heard of hydrophobic rancidity, and if I don't know about it, I'm just going to rule it out based on this. So for this, a food service manager hears reports of the oil being used for cooking tasting rancid. They observe the cooking area and notice that the oil is in an open container without a lid. This would lead to C, oxidative rancidity. Number 4. All of the following are functions of fats and oils except A, heat transfer, B, solubility in water, C, emulsification, or D, satiety. All of the following are functions of fats except A, heat transfer. We know that fats contribute to heat transfer. When you add oil into a pan and cook chicken inside of it, it transfers heat to that chicken. I'm going to rule answer A out because I'm looking for the except in this case. B, solubility in water. That doesn't seem like a function of fat to me. Whenever I mix my fats with water, they tend to separate. So I don't feel like B is, so I would say actually B is a good answer because I'm looking for the one that has all the following functions except. I'm going to hold on to B for right now. C, emulsification. I know that fats do contribute to emulsification by use of making mayonnaise, salad dressings, and helping to bind fat and oil together. I'm looking for the except, so I would rule out answer C. And D, satiety. We know fats contribute to satiety because it helps with that fullness feeling in the stomach. I would rule that one out as well. For number 3, all of the following are functions of fats and oils except answer B, solubility in water, because we know fats are actually insoluble in water. That wraps up today's lesson, students. I hope you watched, listened, learned, and enjoyed today's show. Remembering that passing this exam is a journey, we all need assistance along the way. Please join me for our upcoming RD Exam Ready Live hosted on YouTube. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and tell other studying students. Rate, review, help spread the word. And remember, As always, happy studying to you, RD to be.